Yes. Yeah. Amelia, do you want to get up with us? Hey guys. So then we'll do us. I'll introduce you. And you guys go by now. Okay. Everyone excited? Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to our Fall 2024 Research Symposium for SURG. So excited to be here to have so many people watching and on Zoom too. I'm Nicole, I'm co-president. I'm Chelsea and I'm also the other co-president. I'm Zoe, I'm one of your board members. I'm Amelia and I'm the director of public relations. Awesome. Alrighty, we can get started. Okay, so first we just wanted to introduce you as to what SURG is. So SURG is an undergraduate research group guided by the UN Sustainable Development Goal. So it's right here. And then our research is mostly focusing on empowering undergraduate voices and the accessibility of research on campus, especially since we know a lot of the research on campus, such as URAP and SPUR, can be hard to get into. So we wanted to offer a platform for everybody to just be able to access research. And we are a student-led and collaborative research that tackles an area of sustainability tied to the UN SDGs. And we present research at semesterly symposiums. And yeah, thank you for coming. Okay, to quickly introduce this semester's of SURG's class, we have 25 student researchers this semester with 4 research committees all continuing next semester. And the topics covering in no particular order is cannabis production, overproduction in food and waste and other industries, and then kelp deforestation and then environmental education. And all this research focuses around 17 of the UN SDG goals. And they will be presenting in a little bit. Amazing. All right, we'll have the first committee come up, which is cannabis farming. Oh. You want to come on this side? Yeah, let's go a little bit. Okay. And you're introducing yourself. Yeah, but when you do. Okay. Okay, hey everyone, thank you so much for coming today. We are excited to kick off SURG Symposium this semester with cannabis farming, environmental and policy implications. I'm Celeste.
I'm Mia.
And we're the co-leads. So this is our 3rd semester and counting. And this semester we really succeeded in cementing ourselves in with the Berkeley Cannabis Research Center, and they've really helped guide our project ideas. So what we'll be presenting on as a quick overview is CRC specific projects, which look at agricultural labor policy among diasporas and cannabis monopolies. And then we have SURG specific projects, which is a GIS growth site suitability analysis and air quality case study. And so some of the SDGs that we connect our committee to are good health, clean water, reduced inequalities, responsible consumption, and life on land. And then these are just some of our founding questions that the rest of our research will go over throughout the presentation. Okay, and now I'm going to hand it off to Ethan to start us off.
Okay, so one of the first projects we worked on was a GIS project where we're looking at grow site location analysis and suitability throughout California. So these first two maps show, on this side, all the red dots are licensed cannabis grow sites in California. And then the legend here shows living costs throughout the state. And then over there, you have the same red dots being licensed grow sites and then population density overlaid. So we didn't find a super strong correlation between these two variables, but we did see that grow sites tend to be in more low income and less populated areas, with also a lot of grow sites in highly populated areas like LA. But when you're thinking about those areas, the grow sites still tend to be in lower income spots. And then here we have just temperature for the state of California. So this data set is historical summer temperature averages throughout the state. And on the next slide, we have humidity also for California. Same idea, slightly different date range, but similar data. And then Sean will walk you through the rest of GIS.
We also took a look at both elevation and aspect. Studies in the past have shown that slightly higher elevations do tend to yield slightly better cannabis, and south-facing aspect because it's in the sun will often. This data set was gotten from the USGS LUDEP, which is kind of the gold standard when it comes to these things. Okay, and overlapping all of these environmental conditions on top of each other, we noticed that one, there isn't too much overlap, all of the things are kind of disjointed. And also, if we paste the actual locations of cannabis sites on top, we can see that there isn't the strongest correlation between environmental conditions and people are actually choosing to grow cannabis, showing that this might not be the most optimal predictor of cannabis growth.
So to conclude, just to review our question is like, what is the main factor that motivates licensed grow site location? So we found that cost of living and like optimal growing conditions are not really significant factors when you're looking at where these sites are actually located. And I would say that the strongest locator would be population density, where cannabis grows are typically located outside of larger population centers with higher population density, but in those like slightly more moderately populated areas that do have lower cost of living. So to like kind of sum up our analysis, I would say the greatest motivating factor would be convenience. You want to be near these population centers, have access to a large cannabis market, but you don't want to be in an area that is not really remote or kind of really close to everyone else, and also isn't super expensive. It's also important when looking at these analysis that since we're looking at only licensed grow sites, you have to consider which counties even prohibit the cultivation of cannabis, which you can see on that map right there. Many counties you can't even cultivate cannabis, so there can't be.
And then the next big project that we worked on was an aggregation of materials that will supplement a paper that's going to be published within the CRC next semester. And so first, this looked at a timeline which was accumulating agricultural and cannabis-specific policies that have been implemented on both a statewide and a federal scale. And this is an example of just one of the pages of what we produced. And then we're also looking at an overall literature review that we wrote up in the form of a memo identifying some of the major challenges that are facing cannabis growers, and the rest of the researchers will talk on that right now.
Hello, my name is Bruno. I was in charge of the unionizing, collective bargaining, and organization section of the memo. So the first thing to understand is that unions are very important in the cannabis industry. As we all hopefully know, they're responsible for ensuring safe work conditions, fair compensation, and they provide avenues for recompense in the event of unjust treatment. Labor peace agreement, or an LPA, involves a union, well, actually a bona fide labor organization and a commercial cannabis cultivator. And in order to get a license, a commercial cannabis cultivation license with the DCC, or the Department of Cannabis Control, a commercial cannabis licensor or licensee has to sign this agreement, or an LPA, with a bona fide labor organization. The labor organizations themselves are verified by the ALRB, the Agricultural Labor Relations Board, who just is responsible for making sure that these organizations are actually collective bargaining and acting on behalf of their employees and not just a sham organization, as there is a history of. As you can see there on this table of DCC, Department of Cannabis Control, labor peace agreements on file, there are actually these bottom 6 organizations have all been identified as suspicious. That's why they probably have, 1, 2, and 3 LPAs signed. And then recommendations to solve these issues, as you can read on the slide, the ALRB should allocate more resources to actually identifying labor organizations that are illegitimate. The DCC should allocate resources or allocate responsibilities to other departments so that they can focus on issuing and revoking licenses in a timely manner, because they're the ones who are responsible for notifying a commercial cannabis cultivator if the labor organization that they have a labor peace agreement with is illegitimate. So they should do their job, but also that would probably require more funding. Thank you.
And I did the next part, which was about health and safety conditions within cannabis farms and then dispensaries. So some things that we saw was that there was regulations and not necessarily enforced, but provided by Cal OSHA. And then with the fact that it wasn't quite enforced, but recommended, there was a lack of work and safety conditions within both dispensaries and farms. So some harsh working conditions that were both impacting physical and mental health of farm workers and dispensary workers were, for farm workers, there was lack of sanitation and food. There was a very delay on their payment methods. And then they were just being overworked with the different harsh conditions with like not proper like air filtration and all that in different sites. Then for dispensary workers, they were distressed due to customer interactions on the day-to-day, but also boredom of repetitive tasks within what they were doing. So some protections that we recommend specifically for farm workers is like helping migrant workers specifically, because sometimes they don't feel safe enough to speak out due to their status. So we recommend ways to help them with that. And then also improving management so that workers can feel safe to actually speak up regardless of migrant status. Also getting stricter repercussions, because sometimes on the harsh work conditions, we would see death and violations. So we would also recommend proper licensure, like Bruno was stating, and then researching connections between cannabis farming, but also regular agricultural farming. And then establishing a consistent and standardized auditing of the regulations that are currently in place, so they're actually enforced within the farming practices.
Hi, my name is Gabby, and I did the age part of the memo. I specifically looked at the minimum age requirement for cannabis workers in comparison to agricultural farm workers. Now, for agricultural workers, the persons under 21 and even teenagers are allowed to engage in these occupations. This varies state to state, but there's a federal minimum, and it also depends on certain factors like in versus out of school hours, or in school season versus out of school season. And it also prohibits some hazardous occupations, such as like the operation of mechanical equipment or exposure to harmful substances for persons of a certain age. However, there is a very strict line with cannabis workers in general, and that is 21 and over. Despite this, however, in the previous years with the passing of Prop 2064 in 2016, cannabis offenses by those under the age of 21 are now considered infractions rather than felonies. And it also allows for the destruction of court records. So those who have had a conviction or an arrest due to a cannabis offense can overcome that and be able to move on with their lives. And this this minimum isn't without its reasons, as many researchers believe that for adolescents, the use of cannabis can impair cognitive judgment and cognitive function. However, as Gina alluded to just now, and as Maddie and Madison will also speak about, the health risks for workers are especially risky as well, as you can see on the screen. And these are obviously things that we do not want to be exposing minors to. However, there are other industries in which these risks are undertaken by those who are 18, as that is the age of consent. By keeping the 21 age minimum requirement, we're also operating under the assumption that those who are working in the cannabis industry are inherently using. And that's an untrue supposition, and also one that enforces that stigma that a lot of cannabis workers face today. So our recommendation is, as 18 is the age of consent, and if these conditions, these working conditions are to improve, and if cannabis is to be in the future considered an agricultural product rather than a drug, then we should lower the minimum age requirement for cannabis workers to 18 years old. Thank you.
Okay. So then I looked at the housing and living conditions for cannabis workers on cannabis farms. So just to preface, cannabis harvesting tends to be temp work, so it's seasonal. So these people don't do it year round. And due to the remoteness of a lot of the locations, while harvest is happening, they'll live on site. So there's a big lack of workplace safety investigations on cannabis farms between 2016 and 2021. 35 cannabis workers died on site due to work-related problems, but only one of these deaths prompted an official workplace safety investigation, which is concerningly low. They also face forced labor and exploitation. Having to live on site, they're not provided any sort of shelter. So a lot of times they're sleeping outdoors, it'll be raining, and they're not given food, water, or somewhere to shower or use the bathroom. So a lot of times they'll resort to sleeping inside of sheds where materials are kept, or inside of the greenhouses where the cannabis is actually growing. And the result of this can be exposure to a lot of toxic chemicals and fumes that have a lot of long-term effects. And also due to the undocumented status of a lot of workers, employers will withhold identification documents and wages from them, giving them no choice but to stay and comply with whatever demands their employers might have. And they also face a lot of barriers to proper medical care because grow sites are located so far away, and they're exposed to such extreme conditions. A lot of workers will develop chronic illnesses that they have a really hard time getting treated, because nearest hospitals can be 4 to 5 hours away, and without any sort of personal vehicle for transport, and the cost of traveling 4 to 5 hours away and losing wages, and having to pay for medical care, they often just don't get treated, which makes things worse. So our recommendations that will fix this are to strengthen workplace safety enforcement mechanisms, specifically within the cannabis industry. Agriculture as a larger industry doesn't seem to have the same problems with lack of investigation. We also think that licensed farms should be regularly inspected without telling them that you're coming, to make sure that all guidelines have been complied with. And finally, we think there should be an increased accessibility of medical care and food services for workers working so far away. Oh, and this is just a summary slide of the memo, all of the context for the 4 different categories and our recommendations that are tied to each.
Okay, so because of the things that Gina, Gabby, and Ethan talked about, we did an independent case study on indoor cannabis cultivation and air quality. So some background was that cannabis was legalized for recreational use in California in 2016, which caused an increase in indoor cultivation. And at least like most of the 50 states have some sort of cannabis use, but most is medicinal. So we did a study on the health concerns, mainly for air quality. So because cannabis is cultivated indoors, there's a high exposure to BVOCs, which are biogenic volatile organic compounds, which cause a variety of health conditions. And there are high levels of BVOCs found in facilities in California and Nevada right now. And so those cause things like asthma and allergens. So there are high numbers of workers that are having allergy-like symptoms, or even true asthma, allergen attacks, because of organic compounds in the air. And then there are also cases of extreme asthma. So one case was a woman in Michigan, was the one workplace investigation because she died of cardiac arrest due to an asthma attack, which she had not had asthma before working at the cannabis cultivation plant.
And then another health concern that we found that was really prominent in the indoor cannabis facilities was mold. So with the lack of air circulation and the bad air quality, it's like a perfect breeding ground, and the humidity, for mold to grow. And the mold causes a lot of health problems for the workers, such as respiratory issues, and these issues can even cause death. So we suggest ways to prevent is obviously to implement a better system of air circulation. and air filtration systems, which can kind of recycle the air and take out the bad and bring in good. And also we recommend a good sanitation program for these facilities. And then, so we talked about this earlier, Bruno talked about it, but labor peace agreements and unionizing are key to prevent these issues. I guess expand workers' rights. So by providing like a voice or like a community for these workers to, get more rights is important. And one of the relevant legislations that we explored was the California Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1973, which is basically where employers are required to give employees, like inform them about the bad health conditions in workplaces and give them ways to avoid them.
Cool. Another project we worked on with the CRC is a URAP on Hmong diasporas farming and medicinal plants. So we worked with Pang Lore at the CRC, and we focused on Hmong farmers and their role in cannabis cultivation, and we focused on the following 4 themes that you can see there. So mainly, some background is the project interviewed Hmong farmers across the country, mainly in California, and generated an AI tool to generate transcripts based on those interviews. And this AI model was based off of those raw audio files. Our task at SURG was to listen to the audio files while simultaneously scanning along with the AI-generated transcript to edit for clarity and accuracy to make sure that they reflected the content of the interviews. And some of the main themes that we were experiencing in these interviews were things like migration and immigration, the permitting process, stigmas around cannabis farming, and areas in California that were better or worse for growing cannabis.
Another thing we did was create discourse timelines, which is where we basically followed along with the Hmong immigration and kind of like put like timeline stamps of important events. And we really focused on Hmong and their farming practices, especially with cannabis, because cannabis is really a part of the Hmong tradition. So it's like really in their culture. So we followed that. So there were a bunch of key events that we pointed out, but one of the main ones is that in around 1976 is when a bunch of Hmong, Mien, and Lao families came to Fresno and were farmers. And, like I said, like they're all farmers. So there's like a secret garden in 1995 where these Hmong immigrants made. And these gardens were actually not supported by the city, and they actually didn't know about it till recently. So the city actually took the land back, which is a current event that they're still struggling with today. Yeah.
So since we will be continuing, I thought I'd talk about some of the things that we have ongoing for next semester. We're going to continue with the agricultural labor project, continue to provide edits and work with Joanna on that. We're going to continue with our URAPs, mainly the Cannabis Monopolies Project and the Hmong Diasporas Project. We're also developing a new project with Chris Dillis, a project scientist at the CRC, where we're going to be modeling different extraction frequencies for monthly average values and seeing how that impacts salmon habitat in California. That'll be a really cool project, have like an ecological literature review portion as well as like a coding portion. We're going to be using either R or Python to run like some bagging models essentially. And then we're also going to hopefully conduct more case studies that will be more open topic and also hopefully conduct an interview with a grower.
Thank you. Thank you. We give 2 minutes for questions. Okay. Ask questions. Okay.
I know you guys mentioned like new concerns that were coming. Were you guys like looking into like pesticides being used when like with like cannabis growing and like correlation
For like the air quality stuff or just
like
or like the farming,
like the part like with the asthma case?
Yeah, so the BVOCs are like generated sometimes by pesticide and fertilizer use in indoor cultivation. There wasn't a specific link between like specific pesticides and BVOCs, but just like in general, there are a lot of compounds in the air, like dust and other sort of like offshoots of cannabis production that like just generated the like asthma symptoms and like allergies.
I think also terpenes that come from the cannabis plant can also be like irritants in those, like especially in those indoor facilities.
You might have said this, but were you guys able to visit any of these farms this semester?
No, we haven't been able to do visits. A lot of we've looked into this actually over the course of the project as a whole, and many tours of cannabis farms are not very academically focused. So maybe when we conduct the interview with the grower next semester, we could have a tour in a more casual way. And we're hoping to make that contact over next semester. But as of now, no. But hopefully.
Great job, you guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
Up next,
Right back at the snack. Are your fingers small enough to do that? Really good.
just gonna get a,
Just get off.
I'm just gonna get a whole bunch. Thank you.
Thanks, dude.
I'm still one. Gently do. I'm great.
I don't. Sorry.
Overproduction, take four.
Hey guys.
Hello, so we're the Overproduction Committee and we looked into food and clothing overproduction causes, effects, and solutions. I'm Amelia, by the way.
I'm Alexa.
My name's Tiva.
I'm Ashley.
This is what we're gonna be going over.
So first we're going to start with the background of clothing, and so we can see how intensive the process is. And this is going to be in the context of just one piece. So here's the general flow of what it takes to make a pair of jeans, and we're going to go into each one of these steps in more detail. So for cotton production, it takes 2/3 of a kilogram of cotton to make one pair of jeans, and to produce 1 kilogram of cotton, it takes 2 to 23 tons of water to use. And then the pesticides that you need to produce cotton make up 12% of all pesticides used. And for insecticides, 25% of all insecticides used. This heavy use of pesticides and insecticides are create an environmental health crisis for anyone who lives nearby. And additionally, the natural fibers are environmentally the most safe, but it's cheapest to use synthetic fibers. So those are the ones that are used most often. Fabric formation requires a lot of energy and produces a lot of chemical waste. The sizing process uses natural or synthetic sizing agents. And pre-treatment for coloration uses sodium hydroxide and detergents to remove hydrophobic substances. Then the jeans are washed after they're dyed, and the dye pollutes the nearby water sources. And then garment manufacturing includes spreading, cutting, sewing, heat pressing, ironing, and packaging. The process is high in manual labor, in fabric waste, energy use, and the impact of chemicals. The environment is heavily impacted by the use of lubricants, waters, and chemicals. And additionally, there's a step of packaging, hanging materials, and transportation preparation. This process of transportation and distribution includes sending clothes to wholesalers, retailers, distribution centers, and shops. And there's different types of transportation, including road, air, and through the sea. And the environmental cost in this step is mostly gas and oil consumption. And then depending on how the jeans are made and the way that the consumer treats their product will alter how long the piece of clothing will last. So certain clothes are made to be washed as minimally as possible so then they can last longer. And here jeans can be thrifted and jeans can be used for alternative purposes. One that we found that was really interesting was old denim has been used to create insulation for homes and civic buildings. And then finally, We like walk through the life cycle of one pair of jeans, but at this point, denim jeans constitute 2.3 million tons of waste per year. And only 10% of that gets recycled. The rest ends up in landfills.
We found that textile overproduction is largely caused by efficiency, business sales strategy, and inaccurate predictions. Overproducing textiles allow companies to be more efficient with their supply, allowing them to produce cheaply in bulk and handle waste as an afterthought. Furthermore, business sales strategies such as discounts, emails, and targeted advertisements increase the demand for products, which subsequently leads to more overproduction. This extends into the social aspect of it. As more products are offered, the desire to buy more products increase, and as that desire grows, so does the market. To keep up with the fashion trends, companies create clothing before the trends. This creates unnecessary production of textiles that may not be used due to these inaccurate predictions.
So now moving on to the effects of textile overproduction. So overproduced clothes can end up in a lot of places. Some of it is shipped overseas, some of it's incinerated, some of it's recycled, but a majority is unfortunately thrown into the landfill. So the first effect of textile overproduction is a loss of revenue. So globally, $136 billion are lost due to overproduction. And there's 92 million tons of waste, of textile waste globally. And the apparel and footwear industry are responsible for 4 to 8% of like global emissions. So this is a big sector of that. And for more environmental impact, so a lot of this fast fashion clothes, as we mentioned, they use like synthetic fibers. And so that means like polyesters and things like that. So it's plastic and like oil-based. So when they're thrown in the landfill, they leach like microplastics, dyes, like the other toxic chemicals that are like within plastics into the soil and the groundwater, which like contaminates it. And as we heard earlier, like there's so much water use and there's just a lot of emissions from like transportation and everything. So it's important that we make sure this perfectly good clothes does not end up in the landfill. And as for the social impacts, landfills are 2.8 times more likely to be placed near a low-income or POC community in the US. So the people who are like least responsible for throwing away all these clothes and like for this overproduction problem are the ones that are suffering from these consequences, unfortunately. And also with clothing being shipped overseas, when this shipped overseas, like these are like third world countries that receive it and then they try to like resell the clothes. But since it's like fast fashion, like just the quality is not very good, they end up not being able to resell very much. So we just have like huge piles of like in the landfill, like pictured above, of unused clothes.
Given how big this problem is, it is important to see that there are laws that are being placed, and we have a list here of laws that are being passed in the US. Before we do go through these acts, it's really important to realize that many of them are really new. Like most of these have not been passed and they're in committee. And the ones that have been passed are like within the past year. So we have no data to show whether or not they are effective or not, but there are steps that are being taken. So first, the Textile Recovery Act of 2024 has been passed recently in California, and it creates the United States' first extended producer responsibility textile program. And this program places the burden of responsibility of the garment's life cycle on the producer rather than the consumer. So the hope of the legislation is to kind of force producers to make less wasteful products and to create more sustainable designs. The Garment Worker Protection Act and the federal and the Fabric Act both work to make the fashion industry more safe for people who are working in it. So at this point in time, if you're a garment worker, you get paid for the amount of garments you make, and this would make an hourly wage, so you're less susceptible to harsh treatment. And the thing that's more interesting about the Fabric Act that I found was that typically these type of policies drive companies away from the United States, as it would drive up their costs. But this policy, which is has not been passed and is still in committee, would give a 30% tax credit to the companies who move their production to the United States. And then the Americas Act is part of a larger piece, but one of the parts focuses on creating a 15% tax reduction for businesses involved in collection, reuse, sorting, or recycling of textiles. And this piece has only just been introduced to Congress. And finally, the Fashion Sustainability and Social Accountability Act is a New York bill that still has not been passed, but would place sustainability requirements on large fashion companies. And the companies would be required to map their supply chain and human rights concerns. And then the companies would then have to put into place different policies to regulate their own issues that they found.
So now for laws surrounding clothing or production abroad, we focus mostly on the EU because that's where we were able to find the most. So first is the French fast fashion bill, which bans fast fashion advertising of older fast fashion brands like Shein and Temu, and it also places a surcharge on each individual item of fast fashion clothing that is sold, and it's going to amount up to the max surcharge price will be at 10 euros in 2030, and that's for each garment. And the benefits from this surcharge, that revenue is going to go back to sustainable fashion brands, so reinvested back to them. And then for the EU Eco Design for Sustainable Products and Regulation, so this actually bans the destruction of unsold textiles and footwear, and it requires large companies to disclose the annual information on unsold products. So the number of unsold products, why they're unsold, and what they're going to do with it, and why they would throw them away if they have to. And then the EU waste shipment regulation bans the exporting of the EU's waste abroad. As I was mentioning, to the third world countries, they're not allowed to do that actually. And it also increases regulation to make sure enforcing this law, okay, yeah, we really can't do this. So that's great. And then lastly, the EU Waste Framework Directive. So pictured there, that's the waste hierarchy that they share. So the first step is prevention, and then reuse, recycling, recovery, disposal. So this is just how they want to prevent waste and just things for a circular economy in general.
So now we're going to be focusing on food overproduction and the policy implications of that.
Yeah, in just the US, we found that food loss and waste embodies 170 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gas emissions, excluding landfill emissions, which is comparable to 42 coal-powered power plants. Furthermore, food waste is the single most common material in the US landfills, comprising 24 and 22% of landfill and combusted municipal solid waste, respectively.
Yeah, so to understand the full scope of food waste, it's really important to understand the supply chain that agricultural products have to go through in order to get from the farm to our tables or our grocery stores. So obviously food starts in the production stage at a factory farm or a family farm. It's really difficult for food to make it out of this stage though. Pest damage and weather damage often deems food inedible before it can even make it off the farm, and unharvested and spoiled products go straight to the landfill. Next is the processing and manufacturing stage, which can include drying, mixing, milling, cooking, molding, etc. Here a lot of food is lost through spillage and spoilage, and a lot of food is rejected if it's deemed deformed or spoiled. During the distribution process, food can be damaged, lost, spoiled if it's not delivered to a store or restaurant in a timely manner. And then lastly, once the remaining food makes it to the store or to our pantries, many factors can lead to the edible food being thrown out. Overstocking and inadequate storage can lead grocery stores to throwing away mass amounts of edible food, and date label confusion often misleads consumers to throw their food away before it's actually spoiled. Here's an even more in-depth chart of the ways food can be lost through the supply chain. I won't go through all of it, but it's just really shocking that so much of our food actually does end up in grocery stores after having to go through all of this. That being said, however, not a lot of our food does make it to our table. According to the USDA, 30 to 40% of the US food supply is lost as food waste every year. And there's a few causes of this. So we're going to specifically be looking at food waste in developed countries in this specific example. So the first cause, as I just touched on, is accounting for the sheer amount of food that's lost during the supply chain. In order to meet our food security needs globally, we have to be producing food to provide for 130% of our food supply needs, assuming that the average diet of each person is 2,600 calories a day. However, in developed countries like the US and the EU, we're actually producing for a much higher caloric diet per person. In the US, we produce enough food to feed each person 3,800 calories per day, which is crazy considering that 34 million Americans are still considered food insecure. And then in addition, the United States incentivizes surplus food donations and has invested in food aid programs, reducing the costs associated with food storage and disposal. The 1985 Farm Bill mandates that 75% of food aid is to be transported by US shipping companies. So the bill encourages farms to overproduce surplus food for profit, as they often receive more money than the cost of production itself. Although the surplus is directed towards a good cause and feeding people abroad that need the food, the system contributes to the inefficiencies and food loss within the supply chain. So consequently, large farms do not bear any consequences for overproduction.
As for the effects, food overproduction creates far-reaching impacts that contribute to economic inefficiencies, environmental harm, and devastating effects on biodiversity. Beginning with economic impacts, a 2010 case study revealed that 133 billion pounds of food worth $161 billion was lost at the retail and consumer levels. On average, American businesses lose $74 billion annually due to food waste, overproduction, and overstocking, which contributes to massive inefficiencies and financial losses. In addition, food waste also has a profound environmental impact. Globally, it generates 8 to 10% of annual greenhouse gas emissions, nearly 5 times the emissions produced by the aviation sector. This is a huge contributor to accelerating anthropogenic climate change. Finally, food overproduction is the leading cause of biodiversity. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reported the killing of over 34 million native wild animals to protect livestock. In addition, 70% of deforestation in the Amazon rainforest is directly caused by cattle factory farming.
So the only law that there is surrounding food overproduction in the US is Senate Bill 1383 in California, which is a mandated compost and food donation law. So every person in California must be composting, and grocery stores of a certain size and like restaurants of a certain size also have to be composting and then donating the food that's still good.
So currently, where we're kind of leading for, currently what we're considering like researching further next semester is the current issues in food overproduction policy, specifically in the US. In our research, we found that current food waste policy in the US focuses mostly on food waste management and not the prevention of surplus food. So we suggest that policy should be focused in reducing food waste along the supply chain, have more robust measures to make sure that food isn't spoiled or spilled in the process. Also, food waste education programs have become pretty popular, and they can be really helpful in like teaching consumers like what they can do with their part in the food waste dilemma, but it doesn't really hit the core of the issue, which is earlier in the supply chain before the food actually reaches the consumer.
And then finally, we're hoping to continue our research onto next semester. And while doing this, we've, as you've seen, looked at federal and even the EU's policy, but we're hoping to take that and narrow our focus onto California's economy. And so we want to develop an understanding of California's economy and how that can end up impacting the national economy. And then we also want to develop specific policy recommendations for California and follow the steps of existing legislation abroad. Yeah.
So yeah, does anyone have any questions for us?
It was mentioned 34 million animals killed to protect ag. What sort of animals are being killed by USDA?
In the article from the USDA, it just said like native animals. So I'm assuming that it's like a lot of biodiversity loss and fracturing of ecosystems that are leading to native animals not having a home to survive in.
Policy wise, do you guys feel like overproduction, like the laws that we passed to prevent these issues are sufficient? And like, it seems like probably not. So like, what recommendations would you have to actually make effective legislation?
Yeah, so that's what I was kind of focusing on, like, in that one slide about prevention instead of management. A lot of the policy is surrounding what to do with uneaten edible food that comes from grocery stores or restaurants that they're not going to sell in time before it goes bad. So that's a really good thing to do with like the surplus food once it gets to the consumer level. But I think the root of the issue is that farmers are actually incentivized to sell in bulk because US shipping companies actually profit from shipping our surplus food to other countries. So I think that there needs to be better policy in actually protecting food that's edible along the supply chain process so that we don't have to be producing as much food to like make up for the lost food along the supply chain.
And then like for us, for like the fashion side of it, I think that a lot of what we've been looking into is creating financial incentives for companies to make clothing that'll actually last a while. And also making it so that sustainable clothing is like affordable, since a lot of sustainable clothing ends up being so much more expensive that even if you end up using unsustainable clothing for a while, you're still buying unsustainable clothing. And that's what the France bill and the New York bill are both trying to do. It's just they're still so little and so young that we don't know how successful it's going to be. But I think there's a chance that at least the French bill will be okay. Yeah.
We'll do a 5-minute break, just for like intermission. Feel free to grab snacks, take a breather. Y'all did so good. Sorry. Yeah. No, it's already. I'm gonna open these up then, don't mind if I do. I think we should check out like oh, I think that's those. Oh, really? Okay, good. Yeah. Snack? Oh, I don't know about lunch on the plate. I should have brought it up earlier. I forgot. Oh no, you're sitting. You're stuck up here. We actually. I can check. It's like an over. Not me on Zoom. I mean, One minute warning. Alrighty. Up next is the Kelp Deforestation. Okay, I think that's a size reference. We'll do 3 and then we're gonna check the weight. Okay. I've made you a couple, so I've been adding them more. Alrighty. Hello, everybody. We are the Kelp Deforestation Committee. My name's Imogene. I'm Lauren. Hi, I'm Monica.
I'm Sophia.
I'm Summer.
I'm Michiko.
So just a little introduction on kelp forests in general. There are the underwater rainforests of the world, and they're one of the most biodiverse and productive ecosystems on Earth. So they provide carbon sequestration and a lot of habitat for a lot of animals, aquatic life, and other things. But in the past decades, there has been an unprecedented rate of deforestation driven by a combination of natural and anthropogenic factors. And specifically on the California coast, they have seen the biggest decimation of kelp forests. So these forests have led to a cascading effect on economies and the global climate resilience in general.
So climate change has played an active role in the ongoing kelp deforestation, and it is at the root of warming oceanic and atmospheric temperatures, and also the increase of frequency, duration, and intensity of natural disasters. So marine heat waves and El Niños are naturally occurring climate patterns, but climate change has increased their prevalence. Marine heat waves specifically have been caused by ocean currents and atmospheric pressure, and they warm the ocean significantly. And El Niños occur in the Pacific Ocean, but they also have they have the ability to increase the ocean temperature by 0.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, which is detrimental to kelp propagation because kelp thrives in cooler ocean temperatures. Additionally, we see that climate change affects the intensity of natural disasters like tropical storms, hurricanes, and tsunamis. And this is not good for kelp because the intense and aggressive currents can uproot the holdfast from the seafloor and cause them to perish. So a specific case study here shows that in yellow, El Niños in 1997 to 1998, and from 2015 to 2016, and also a marine heat wave from 2014 to 2015 in pink, really decreased the kelp canopy coverage, and we see an overlap in 2015 in orange with the most significant decrease the lowest.
Kelp is important for the marine ecosystem because it provides habitats for organisms. The kelp forests have a special ability to affect particle dispersion. So their understories have like very nutrient-rich environments for organisms to grow and prosper. So they maintain the food webs because there's plenty of species there that use kelp for food and for shelter. They're also very large carbon sinks, meaning they sequester a lot of carbon dioxide in the air that mitigates the effects of climate change. So losing kelp is bad because it would make a lot of ecosystem services just like unavailable. One of them is obviously fishery declines. As kelp forests become obsolete, the fish that use kelp for shelter and for food will either go extinct or they're just going to move on to different places where fisheries aren't established in order to find the resources they need to survive. That also affects nutrient cycling. So the water quality will become poor, or a phenomenon called eutrophication will happen, which is when there's excess nitrogen in the water and algal blooms start, and the algal blooms will use up all the oxygen, creating dead zones where there's no biodiversity and nothing can survive. Obviously, like I said, kelps are huge carbon sinks, so the loss of kelp forests will decrease carbon sequestration and increase climate change effects in the ocean. Like Sophia said, that's detrimental to kelp forests because the ocean temperature will rise and more species will be pushed out of their range of tolerance and die off. Kelp also provides protection for coastal environments. The density of the forest can slow down wave impacts, reducing shoreline erosion, and it protects inland ecosystems like estuaries from becoming too diluted with salt water.
So now I'll be talking about the kelp industry and their benefits, challenges, and also like the future of the kelp industry. So firstly, what does the kelp industry benefit? So first, kelp is used for food and nutrition. So kelp is used in traditional and modern cuisines, especially in East Asia, since they are nutrient rich and filled with vitamins and antioxidants. Second, the kelp are used for agriculture. So kelp-based fertilizers are used to promote sustainable agriculture. They promote healthier crops and also reduce the need of chemical fertilizers. And thirdly, they are used for industrial uses. So often kelp are used for biodegradable plastics and cosmetics. Next. So the challenges the kelp industry faces is first, climate change is threatening kelp productivity with rising ocean temperatures and also marine heat waves. Second, there are limited opportunities for seaweed farming because of the lack of infrastructure for large-scale production and also the lack of limited areas in coastal areas for seaweed farming. And there's also a lack of awareness in investors about the economic benefits of the kelp industry. And the last challenge they face is that there are market constraints in the kelp industry because of the inconsistent demand they have. But despite those challenges, the future of the kelp industry is pretty bright. So first, there are a lot of companies like Barnacle Foods that are driving innovation in kelp-based foods. So example here, it's like their kelp chili crisp. And then second, there are a rapid growth in seaweed agriculture globally. So in countries such as Norway and China, there is an increase of kelp farming, which shows like the increase in kelp demand in other countries. And lastly, the kelp industry will help with the blue economy goals, which is basically the goal of sustainable use for ocean resources.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to be talking about are urchins. So seems kind of weird, but urchins actually pose a big threat to kelp. So sea urchins are basically herbivores, and like there aren't that many plants in the sea. So the main thing they do eat is kelp. One important thing is that they eat like the holdfast, which is like the bottom of the kelp. So it's not like they're just feeding off the top, they're like uprooting the plant as a whole. They also tend to overgraze, so they eat a lot of the kelp, and then the whole kelp forest become like devoid of nutrition, sort of rendering like the whole forest like kind of dead. And then one reason for this is because there are fewer and fewer predators of sea urchins, such as sea otters and lobsters. A lot of this is because of global warming, so it shows how like these organisms are kind of like interconnected. So some efforts being made is something called urchin cooling, where urchins are being like manually removed. So you have divers going down there and like plucking them with their hands. A lot of people like, or not a lot, but this is sometimes brought up as like an issue because there's a lot of like human intervention happening, and like that's not always a good thing when it comes to these ecosystems where humans don't necessarily belong. There's also predator protection. So trying to protect things like sea otters and lobsters, which again, sort of showing the interconnectedness of everything. And then of course, like replanting kelp. So because so much of this kelp is kind of falling under these urchin barrens, I'm trying to regrow. But again, this is difficult to do. It's like a lot of work for like humans to keep up with these like ever decreasing ecosystems. But yeah.
Yeah, so for society and economy and how it like interacts with kelp, we decided to focus on Native American communities and small businesses. So there are a lot of Native communities that do like ecological restoration and like preservation work for kelp ecosystems, because kelp ecosystems tend to be really culturally and environmentally significant. So like a couple that I can think of right now are like, there's the Kelp Guardians project, which is an indigenous led project to kind of like train members of the Talawadi Nation, I think, to like be aware of the kelp surrounding their areas, and then do a lot of like kelp monitoring and then kelp restoration. There's also the Mayaka Band of Pomo Indians, which is also like working with the Great Farallones Association to monitor kelp and collect data for further scientific research. But the one I wanted to focus on the most was the Samish tribe. So they had an issue where kelp forests around the San Juan Islands, which is like their traditional fishing grounds, started to decline a lot. And so they interviewed a lot of tribal knowledge holders and fisher folk who have been fishing in those areas like for a really long time. And they were able to create an honor map showing where traditional and general areas of kelp used to be that are now like declining. So currently the Samish tribe is studying why the kelp is disappearing from those areas. Samish dive teams, like this picture right here, collect a lot of data, and they survey and monitor the kelp health in those areas to then share with the University of Washington, which is doing more of like the science side of those things. They do have a few theories as to why the kelp is disappearing from those areas, although none has been confirmed, but like some of the possible theories are like the relationship between sea otters and kelp. So according to a lot of traditional knowledge holders, there used to be a lot of sea otters in those areas, but now sea otters have like declined. And so because of that, and because they are a predator of urchins, like as we mentioned earlier, urchins have been kind of like decimating the kelp forest. So that's a possible reason. Another reason could be increased sedimentation from agricultural practices or flooding that impacts the health of these kelp ecosystems. Another reason could be impact of like modern day vessels ripping up seabeds, and that obviously like impacts the hold that kelp forests have, you know, and kind of like ripping them up. And then there's the pinto abalone, which is an abalone that cleans off rocks, which is important for kelp restoration because kelp need to, especially like this particular kelp, which is bull kelp, tend to stick onto like rocks in order to anchor like their roots and then to grow from that. So that's actually part of the restoration effort that the Samish tribe is currently working on. So like these divers will go and they will outplant a lot of pinto abalone, like baby pinto abalone in these kelp ecosystems. so that they can clear off those rocks and encourage kelp growth. And then I interviewed someone from the Samish tribe who like told me all about this, and she really emphasized the importance of traditional ecological knowledge. So she said, you know, the community holds a lot of knowledge and data and stories about these ecosystems that like, these stories are thousands of years old. And that is science that like needs to be taken seriously and also needs to be included into Western science because it's important and it's valid and it's important to like encourage that validity. She said that oftentimes Western scientists will like do work on indigenous traditional homelands, but then not like engage with the indigenous community at all, not really talk to them, and then do their own research and come up with answers that the tribe already knew about, you know. And they were like, well, if you had just talked to us, we could have told you like, this is why this is happening. And they end up telling those indigenous stories instead of like indigenous people having agency over, you know, that research themselves. So it's really important to kind of ensure that communication. And then on the small business side, so kelp forests are actually really important for the economy. Their estimated like GDP is worth over 500 billion annually. And that's because of the ecosystem services they provide, like boosting fish production, CO2 sequestration, and removal of excess nutrients like nitrogen. So some examples are like Barnacle Foods, which was mentioned, they like create food products out of kelp, and then Shinnecock Kelp Farmers, which is a multi-generational collective of indigenous women who are restoring areas of like traditional lands by farming sugar kelp.
So now we're going to be talking about some of the research that is currently being done. I chose a lab that's like a more academic focused lab, the legal lab at Stanford, so it's also pretty local. So their research is studying bull kelp, which is like this canopy forming kelp, one of the more common ones, and has a really big declining population in the Salish Sea. So the gametophyte densities started dropping at 18 degrees Celsius. And so there was limited reproduction of this kelp. So it basically showed that high temperatures were really harmful for kelp growth, especially at like the younger stages. So the kelp wasn't even able to like grow. Like it's not like they grew and then they died. They just weren't able to grow in the first place, which is a really serious issue. Another thing is high temperatures are more harmful than like low nitrogen levels. So a lot of times people associate like low nutrient levels with the declining kelp populations, but the issue more so stems from the high temperatures, which again links back to climate change. So the methodologies for this type of research is pretty cool. So they collect these reproductive patches from bull kelp, which is like, it's called the sori. And they, since we can't really change the temperature of the actual seawater, they're placed in like little boxes in seawater to induce like zoospore release, which is how like the kelp basically grows. And then they're placed in different types of temperatures, different levels of nitrogen and fluoride, sorry. And then the zoospores like grow into these gametophytes, and then they're monitoring the growth. So they're basically seeing how different levels of temperature affect the gametophyte growth. And through that, they were able to show that after 18 degrees Celsius, the growth starts dropping. So as temperatures heighten, the kelp aren't able to survive, especially in the earlier stages.
I got to interview a researcher at REAPCHECK, which is an international organization that is dedicated to conserve like tropical reefs and kelp forests. And they're mostly like a volunteer-based organization. So how they started is that in 2004, they started kelp forest monitoring, where they just monitored the health of the kelp. But in 2013, there was the marine heat waves and also the sea star wasting disease, which made the predators of the sea urchins, which are the sea stars, go down, which increased urchin grazing of kelp. So I interviewed a researcher who specifically focused on the restoration efforts in Big Sur and also Tankers Reef, but they also do restoration efforts in Mendocino County. So what I found from our interviews that first, they are volunteer-based monitoring that uses like PISCO protocols, which helps with scientific accuracy. And they perform practical solutions like urchin culling And they would like to, in the future, like reintroduce predators like the sea stars and also, oh, yeah. And then what I learned, which was pretty interesting, is that first, warmer waters benefit the purple sea urchins, which threatens kelp forests. Because in warmer waters also, giant kelp shows like resilience, while bull kelp show the younger kelps actually remain vulnerable. So an example of the giant kelp is that on this picture over here, on the left side was taken in 2020, on the right side was taken in 2024. And actually the abundance of kelp that actually grew were actually giant kelps from the currents in Big Sur instead of new kelp growing, which was very interesting.
Okay, real quick. The lab I interviewed, that their goal is to restore the sunflower star, which is decimated by sea star wasting disease. They're doing so by cultivating the genetic diversity of the surviving sea stars. I had the opportunity to interview one of the researchers at the lab, Dr. Lauren Skywilhut, who's an evolutionary ecologist. Her role in the Sea Star Lab is to provide genetic context to the task of cultivating new sunflower stars. She provides a deeper understanding of population genetics in order to understand the genetic diversity of sea stars. Most of her research has to do with how certain traits can affect certain species' susceptibility to sea star wasting disease. They aren't like specifically sure which traits cause sea star waste or cause susceptibility, but certain traits like breeding period affect it. So one of her hypotheses is that it has something to do with resource allocation during that time. And since they don't know exactly which traits to target for like which species are more susceptible to sea star wasting disease, they haven't begun to use it to predict ecological responses, but that's something that she hopes to do in the future.
And to conclude, I was fortunate enough to talk to a nonprofit organization that has multiple locations in California called the Giant Kelp Restoration Project. Giant kelp is a type of kelp, and it is a giant effort as it's composed of over 700 certified citizen divers. And their philosophy is to just teach citizen divers and volunteers and whoever wants to get some hands-on experience how to replant kelp and also to cull the sea urchins. As you can see here, they also just really prioritize engaging with the community to spread more awareness about this. And an unfortunate takeaway that I learned from an interview was that the government has actually put a halt to their efforts because they want to see how government scientists want to see how quickly the sea urchins will start to eat the new kelp forest. So unfortunately, they've been watching their efforts over the years be eaten, but hopefully that will pass soon.
And then lastly, just our plans for next semester, because we're continuing. We hope to do a literary review of everything we learned. So putting all the research interviews into a consolidated document so we can share with people. We also hope to go on a field trip. So either we hope to go along the coast and go to a lab that is focusing on kelp restoration, and also do a kelp low tide walk and see kelp in action and on the shores. And lastly, we just want to figure out ways to research different communities and audiences, and hopefully can have more people learn about kelp deforestation. Thank you.
Why would the government want to let urchins eat kelp even if it's for research?
Okay, I think it's because like, although it seems bad, research is still taking place, and I guess to just monitor like the kelp that they have recently replanted to see, I guess, how quickly they'll eat it. I have to get any more contact, but it's unfortunate. It's still research in a way.
Can you share more about if the government or like if there's research being done on like reintroducing more like otters? Like otters are just
I can talk a little bit about that. Right now, otters so far we're looking at the regions we're looking at, they have never been the main predator of urchins there. It's always been the sunflower sea star, which was mentioned, the sunflower sea star wasting disease, like decimated the population. So I think now there's only like 1% of sunflower sea stars left in the ocean. So rather than reintroducing sea otters, a lot of labs, as we talked about, are focusing on the starfish more so, since it's more native to like the native California coast ecosystems.
I was curious if there were any efforts, whether it be like policy or community efforts to introduce TPK and like really like talk to community or like the indigenous communities.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Are there any efforts right now to include TEK or to like include indigenous voices?
So when I talked to Emma, she said that like the like certain universities are working with traditional ecological knowledge. So like UW right now is like taking all the information that they're offering. So I'm sure like a lot of other universities are doing that as well. I know the Great Barrelonies Association is working with the Band of Pomo Indians like up in like Northern California. In terms of government, I think it like depends on like what rights and what like recognition certain tribes have. I do also know that Emma talked about how a lot of different tribal like websites have a story map, which you can access and kind of like understand a lot of the traditional ecological knowledge that they have. It's like readily available on those websites. And so she definitely encouraged like looking for those and reading more about like tribal history and the history of ecological knowledge in those areas. So it's accessible, it's available. In terms of like how it's being implemented, I think it's slowly starting to be more implemented by like different universities, but there's a lot more work we have to get there. So, yeah.
You guys mentioned like the kelp food products. Are you planning on trying any of those?
We do have plans, second semester, try some.
You know how like the kelp farmers are keeping urchins out of their out of the kelp they're farming? Are they farming it in labs or are they farming it like in the open ocean? Yes.
Like for the research being done with kelp, like they're usually not growing like huge like kelp farms. It's more like contained to like something like a petri dish where they're more looking for small signs of growth, just because it's hard to like grow like full kelp forests.
And there are some labs right now doing replanting and outplanting into the oceans. But for the growing of kelp, they start in labs. So they have we might go to one of these labs next semester, but they have like these giant tanks that move around the spores and in like constant motion, and they grow up to be pretty large, fat, like I guess kelp. They're like juvenile kelp, and then they use those that they grew in the lab and then put them into the ocean. And they have this thing where they put them on a rope, so they're not actually on the floor, since they don't want the urchins to eat them right away. So they grow on this like rope above, like a couple feet above the floor, and that has been working so far from what we've been seeing.
Great job, you guys. Thank you.
Oh, environmental education. Sorry, like
It's not bad, it's friends. I'm done.
Hi everyone, we are the Environmental Education Committee and we're really excited to share our work with you today. I'm Lillian, I'm one of the co-leads.
Hi there. Oh yeah, I'm also one of the co-leads.
So am I.
I'm Isabella, I'm one of the researchers.
I'm Nithya, I'm also one of the researchers.
I'm Bella, I'm also one of the researchers.
I'm Richard, I'm one of the researchers.
Okay, so our project goal is to gain an understanding of how well educated Berkeley students currently are about environmental issues and how accessible and effective environmental education is at UC Berkeley in its current state. So first, some background. Yeah, so first, what is environmental education? It's a process allowing individuals to explore environmental issues, engage in problem solving, and take action to improve the environment. And as a result, individuals develop a deeper understanding of environmental issues and also gain the skills to make informed and responsible decisions. And why is it important? Because it leads to greater student engagement, develops a sense of connection with nature, it fosters an interest in STEM careers, encourages creativity, and it's also vital to winning the fight against climate change.
Yeah, so we looked at what a couple of other schools are doing in our background research. And one of the most prominent acts we found was the UC San Diego Jane Turain's climate change education requirement. And so basically this was implemented this year, so the 2024-2025 school year. And basically it's saying all incoming freshmen are going to take a single quarter-long course about climate change. And the goal is to have students understand and address climate change of every major. So basically 30% of all courses are going to discuss climate issues, and they're all interdisciplinary and they're all relevant to majors. So this makes it really accessible for all the freshmen who are going to take it because they don't want to add on requirements, they don't want to increase graduation time, but they still want climate knowledge to be accessible for everyone. And they're the first public university with this requirement, and honestly the first major university I could find. There are a couple other universities with smaller requirements, but this is like kind of the big test run, I guess. And so while we were making our survey, we were sort of keeping this requirement in mind. We were wondering, do we need this at Berkeley? And then while we were doing our research, one major source we use is the Yale opinion map of the United States. So basically, it found that 64% of adults fear climate change overall, and this varies a lot by state. So the map's interactive, so you can go in and click and look at the county or the state to see how it is dependent in the different parts of the country. And what we found is Alameda County, where Berkeley is, 79% of adults are worried about climate change. So this shows we're a little above average. So that shows that like adults in Alameda County are pretty well informed about climate issues. However, we also found in the Yale map that 75% of adults want schools to address the causes, consequences, and potential solutions to climate change. And in Alameda County, again, it's about 10% above. So 85% of adults want that in Alameda County. So that shows that like, even in places that are pretty well educated, they still want more education about climate change, and they still want more awareness, especially for the younger generations. But as we know, Berkeley students aren't all from Alameda County. They're from all over the world. They're from 115 countries. They're from every state, and they're from almost every county in California. So geography isn't really the best way to gauge environmental awareness at Berkeley because we're all from different places. So when we're designing our survey, we wanted to know, are Berkeley students environmentally educated from classes or from clubs? Like where are they finding this information? And is Berkeley providing enough resources to like have students enhance their education and learn more about the climate change, the causes, the consequences, and the potential solutions?
Yeah, and then we'll move into the survey design portion, and then I'll hand it off to Julia next. So we split our survey design into 4 different sections. The first section were the factual questions, which were just questions regarding facts about climate change and sustainability. The second section were the challenge questions, which were free response, also about climate change. And then the third section was questions regarding the university in particular. So there were a combination of free response and multiple choice questions on environmental awareness and education on campus. And then the last section was just demographic questions. So things like your gender, age, year, major, minor, etc. And we also made sure to include an option for those who filled out the survey to be anonymous, or for them to be able to be contacted for additional information if we need it. And in order to address any biases, we made sure to get randomized responses to accurately represent UC Berkeley's population. So we avoided sharing surveys to environmentally centered platforms, and instead we tabled on Scrabble and dispersed flyers and QR codes. We also designed questions to make sure that they were clear and concise and they weren't leading to a certain answer. And we also randomized the question order on the survey itself to make sure the answers weren't biased. We also looked to accredited organizations like the Pew Research Center for guidance on how to mitigate any biases. And we included a not sure option on all of our questions to prevent guessing.
Now let's talk a little bit about the sourcing of our survey questions. So here are like four important sources that were vital to how we constructed our survey basically. I'd say the most primary source that we looked at was this 2024 climate literacy guide, sourced from the climate.gov official website. And this really was a comprehensive material that we were able to extract like the key objectives of like public policy, public opinion aspects and what people need to know for us to have substantial climate progress in terms of support for bills and policies that will do good for society in the future. And so looking at those principles and the specific objectives that the government has laid out, we were able to phrase questions in a way that would guide us to our answers that we need. And another important study that we looked at was this one in the bottom right here. Basically a study of a very similar situation that we have here, which is basically like climate literacy at a college, and this was from India. And these are two other sources on the left right here that were also important in influencing how we phrase and our questions and the key information that try to test on the respondents.
Yeah, and then me and Isabel and Angie will talk about our survey results. If you scan the QR code, you can actually get a full like Google document of all of our results. Because we're not going to go over every single question. We don't have time for that. But if you want to take a look, I encourage you. Did everyone who wanted to get it? Okay, cool.
Okay, so to start with, we had total number of 172 people who did the survey, and we had 142 responses who answered at least one question, and 126 people who actually completed the survey. That is 74% of them who actually finished the survey, which was more than we thought. And out of those 126 responses, there were 48 freshmen, 28 sophomores, 26 juniors, 17 seniors, and 7 others were graduate students or people outside from Berkeley. And we also have 58% female and 35% male respondents. So we were able to get a number of 64 unique majors throughout the survey, and the bar graph on the right shows the diverse responses we received. And to point out some of the majors that were most marked were economics for 12 responses, which was 7.2%, 8 data science major responses with 4.8, Coxsci and Poli-Sci, which was 4.2%, and 6 responses for MCB, media studies, and integrative biology, which was 3.6%. So we did tabling in Sproul, and we were able to get diverse range of responses from different majors, and this result is pretty consistent when considering the demographic of the most popular majors at Berkeley.
Yeah. So one more time, sorry. So this is how we scored the factual portion of our survey. We had 9 normal multiple choice questions and then 1 question about compost, where you asked to sort 7 different items into trash, compost, or recycling. Each multiple choice was worth 5 points. Each compost was worth 1. And the free response questions were not considered as part of the score because that was getting too difficult to grade. And then here you can see the average response overall was 67%, which is not horrible, but we're Berkeley students. I feel like we can do better. And then we did notice a significant difference in the averages of students who had taken an environmental class and students who hadn't. There are lots of factors that could affect that, including students who care about the environment are more likely to take the class.
but I did want to point that out. Next slide. Oh, yeah, so the most challenging questions, the ones that people scored the lowest on, were ones about which country has been the largest emitter of fossil fuels since the Industrial Revolution. It's the US. The majority of people were not able to get that. We also had whether natural changes in Earth's climate patterns were responsible for the climate change we've been seeing in recent decades. A lot of people were not able to get that question right either, which is a bit concerning. And then the last one was sort of a more specific question about ocean acidification. Most people were able to get that correct. And I think this shows that while overall people do have a general understanding of what climate change is, some of the more specific questions, people don't really have that level of knowledge about.
So when looking at the free response challenge questions, we had a question about the effects of climate change and a question about environmental laws. Our question for climate change was name and briefly describe one effect that climate change may have on California or whichever state you're from, you call home. We mainly focused, or the answers mainly focused on extreme weather events and areas impacted by climate change. So things such as drought, heat, the oceans, and like the melting of the ice caps. And for our environmental law question, we said name and briefly describe one federal, state, or local law that aims to protect one aspect of the climate. So about 60% of respondents wrote I don't know, which is fair. The people who did know laws, they included the Clean Air Act, the Environmental Protection Act, and the National Parks Act.
Yeah, and then we had another portion of the survey that tried to assess the influence on people's views. About 31% of Berkeley students felt that their views on climate had changed since coming to Berkeley, and of those students, the most cited reason was classes, followed by current events and friends. Most people, like 88%, felt that climate education on Berkeley campus was at least somewhat accessible. And 15% of people we surveyed were involved in some environmental activity, so a club, some type of group. And 36 had taken a class related to climate or the environment, and then a slightly higher portion of non-freshmen had taken one of those classes. And then, yeah, here are a few of our responses that were free response. People explaining how they felt that their views had changed since coming to Berkeley. I'm not going to read all of them, but in general, it looks like people felt that they had become more aware in some aspect since coming, or of the people who felt that their views had changed. I'll give you a second to read that, but I'm not going to go over every single response.
So another one of our challenge questions was one of the questions Bella was posing earlier about the new class that UCSD was implementing and asking if Berkeley should implement a similar policy for undergrads. So 62% of respondents said yes, with 31 saying maybe or not sure. 76% of people who responded were people who had taken an environmental science class, and 20% said not sure, 4% said no. So some of their key concerns mainly were like efficacy and if their major/graduation requirements would be impacted, and also just general student interest in the class. So these are also some of the responses that people responded with. Most of them were about like how taking this one class would impact their major requirements or their breadth requirements, because people really want to get what they need to get done with. And I feel like if they have to take something that they're not interested in or isn't needed for their major, they wouldn't take it. So that was the majority of the responses, but there were a lot of people here.
So just to briefly introduce the limitations of our survey results as well. So first of all, we have a very low sample size. Not very low. We have a decent sample size, but it's not enough to have like a statistically significant analysis with Aaron's assertion that there has to be a 95% confidence level. And it was difficult obtaining a really truly random sample. We found that it was really hard to get an accurate representation of specific CS and some business majors and also seniors, despite our trying to table and sprout and trying to make that as equitable as possible, not equitable, as like evenly split as possible. And frankly, our sample size again was not large enough for us to weigh the different majors response rates, other accuracies by degree program. And so lastly, talking about the survey structure, despite I think we previously discussed that people felt that environmentally related classes at Berkeley were able to help them become more informed or more knowledgeable about the environment, climate change. It's kind of hard to accurately or statistically or connect patterns of sort of knowledge and caring about environmental issues and form like a causal relationship from environmental classes to like improved climate awareness, because I think we previously said that people who were initially more interested in the environment are more likely to take environmental classes in the first place. So it's hard to isolate that effect for the current classes that exist. And so yeah, and also because of the nature of this being a survey, it's not like an objective representation of how exactly informed people are. So,
So key takeaways from our survey and our findings are that students have general understanding of like what climate change is and environmental issues, but they don't understand like the specificities and like the science behind it. Higher education has significant potential to shape people's views on environmental issues and climate change, and a greater variety of classes may be helpful to appeal to all interests and majors. 88% felt it was somewhat accessible, but only 36% had taken a class. So kind of what's next? Using the research and like the results and what we found, that UC Berkeley students aren't as environmentally literate as we would hope they would be. Our next kind of steps and next semester will be focused on like actually taking action about this. So it was kind of split up into finding research and information and then what's next. So we're going to collaborate with key campus stakeholders, like faculty, other environmental groups on campus, like potentially the ASUC Eco Office, etc., to address and collaborate to find solutions on such an issue, and ideas that we're kind of like brainstorming and are going to probably shift a little bit as we collaborate with other people, but working with campus administration to potentially mandate environmental education, or at least begin that conversation of what it would look like. Boosting the current environmental curriculum and seeing how it could potentially be expanded, and exploring educating as many students as possible, potentially via like GBO or other on-campus events or stuff that students are just getting exposed to through campus. So those are the current ideas, but yeah, new ideas may come and new ideas may get swapped out as we meet and talk to more people. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening.
Ways you think you could improve the scope of certificates that you gathered, like tabling or posting flyers somewhere else on campus, or sending people emails?
I mean, something we did talk about was maybe trying to like send it to more classroom discussion boards. Just now that we know what groups of people we were having a harder time getting, we could like try to send it specifically to those groups. Like we didn't have a lot of CS people, even though we have a lot of CS majors on campus. Maybe they're reclusive. That's why we didn't catch them. But yeah. Yeah. So like now that we have a general sense of like what we were able to get, just like targeting more specific groups. Anyone else have Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say like pretty similar. Like we didn't know going into this like what people, we tried to keep it as random as possible, but we didn't know what kind of people we would end up getting until after the survey. Like email blasts and yeah, like targeting maybe like more specific groups would have been.
This is kind of asking you to extrapolate on your data, but I'm still gonna ask the question. Do you think like if this survey was conducted like by the university as a required survey, like do you expect that your results would change? How so?
I don't think necessarily the responses would change. I would just think we would have more like diversity in responses. Like I think like the overall findings would be pretty similar. Like I think it would still be an overall like most people would be in favor of such, but there would be more data to pull from. So like that if it was like say every student had to take it and it was like one of those Cal Central tasks that like it'll like put a hold, like we had to do like the relationships training. If it was like something like that, then we would get way more majors and years and it would be more equally, but we assume like based on the data that since this was like mostly random, that it would have similar results.
Yeah, with more data, we'd be able to say like, hey, we can be like 95% sure that the average score of all Berkeley students is within like this smaller range. Like right now, we're only able to say like it's probably within like 10% plus or minus 10%, but we can't really get more specific than that just based on the response.
I would also argue that even though we would have a greater quantity of responses, I'm not sure how the quality would be. I think, especially with the multiple choice questions and people having to take it, there's a likelihood that some people would just spam random answers and then that would kind of affect our accuracy.
Yeah, especially if it's like not like graded or you don't have to get the right answer. Yeah, there definitely could be people and like they were incentivized because it was like smaller and we had like gift card kind of incentives, but if it was just like, oh, you have to do this and it doesn't really matter what you put, like I could definitely see people kind of just like skipping through it. So that's something to keep in mind too.
Because like I remember when I was looking for my requirements for like physical science and biological science, I feel like within those, I was able to take an environmental science class. So like if we were to add like another breath for environmental science, would there be a way to like overlap? Because I know like some colleges let you overlap, but some don't. So like I guess how could you make it so that you know it's not adding extra things? Because I feel like that's gonna obviously detract people wherever. Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. Students brought that up in their responses. I think ideally if there were a requirement, it could maybe be like one of your like you have to take a class, but it's also allowed to count for a physical science or a biological science or even social science, just because there's a wide range of classes that could potentially qualify.
Also to that same question, I don't know if you've looked at data for this, but since like social sciences and like earth sciences have a different requirements, do you find that like humanities majors may have to get maybe more environmental science, so or like maybe hard sciences? You know what I mean? Because I know like chem majors don't have to take a physical science or like requirements because they're already taking physics. Right? So
I feel like for humanities majors, at least for like the physical and biological science requirement, they would most likely lean towards like sciences that are like quote unquote easier, so they don't have to like torture themselves with like bio or chem or like kind of they would deem like kind of unnecessary for their major. So I feel like leaning towards like an environmental science course would be fun. But also to your previous question, there were a few responses that were like saying that, oh, we could replace like our American cultures requirement with this like specific requirement. So I definitely think that there are people who would like either want like an overlap or having this requirement like make up for something.
Question on, maybe a silly question, but do you think there is like a difference in this requirement working at UC San Diego because they're on quarter system or on semester system? Like maybe that was a did anyone like in the survey say anything about like make it easier to implement it?
I don't think anyone mentioned the semester versus quarter system. You also went through.
Yeah, I don't think anyone mentioned it either. They were more.
But that's a good point, because I feel like they can take like 50% more classes technically than we can, so that's definitely something to think about.
I guess there's also no data yet on the San Diego requirement because it's new this year. So we haven't really seen how students reacted to it. So.
Are there any other implementation? You guys are talking about like next semester. I don't know if you're like advocating for solutions or just kind of bringing stuff up to administration, but like, do you guys have any other ideas as far as increasing environmental awareness that don't involve course requirement, like maybe decal, maybe like a professor workshop, some other event that's held at a campus?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just going to come from like conversations and like seeing what people on campus think. There are like a lot of environmental decals on campus, and they exist as of right now already. And that didn't seem to like, I mean, they're obviously not required, but something that you could explore is like take like a 1 unit pass no pass thing instead of like an actual whole like course, and like maybe mandating a decal in some way. That's the whole thing, is like we're gonna just have to talk to people, engage what administration, staff, and the people who would like actually implement this and be in charge of that think about this kind of stuff. And like we'll present our research and we'll see like what they take. But yeah, we've like also explored other kind of smaller things, but it's still like just merely ideas, and we're not totally sure about what path we're gonna end up taking yet.
Also, recently, I think like all 10 UCs just implemented like a class for next semester about like understanding the climate and like combating climate change. It's like not required, but I think it's like a way for all the like public health schools better help people like understand.
Is that like one of those freshman seminars, or is it just something?
I think it's like a 50-person class. It's like pretty small, but they're just like getting it started.
Potentially having like a list of classes that like, these are the classes that meet the physical science that are in some way environmental, and these are the ones. Just having a list of that, and maybe having that accessible for freshmen / anyone who's really looking to fulfill those breadth requirements, might also be helpful, just in terms of not a mandate, but a way to make it more accessible.
Good job, you guys.
Thank you guys so much. I know we had some people kind of leave, but yeah. Yeah, thank you guys so much. You all did amazing job. Thank you to everyone on Zoom for sticking around and watching. Yeah, great job. Give yourself a round of applause for all the hard work that you did. It was so cool. I mean, we just meet with your committee leads, so we just hear like updates every other week, but like seeing it all unfold is just so, and you guys, yeah. Make sure to stick around. I'm gonna end the Zoom, but we have a couple more announcements. But yeah, thanks. Great job, you guys. Thank you, everyone. Oh my gosh, thank you, Priya. Guys, Priya and Joyce are here. Yeah, they were presidents last year. Okay, how do I? Woohoo! Oh, thank you, Kate. Oh, miss you, Kate. Okay. Oh, okay. Wait, I'm gonna end it on my ended there. Okay. Should I leave here?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.